The air in the interrogation room of the Arkham PD annex was thick and tasted of old coffee and regret. Detective Alex Thorne, 35 and already sporting the weary lines of a man who'd seen too much of the city's underbelly, leaned back, rubbing his temples. Across the steel table sat Sarah Jennings, a pale, rail-thin woman in her early 20s, who looked less like a witness and more like a ghost. "Ms. Jennings, we need you to go over it one more time," Thorne said, his voice a low, steady rumble designed to soothe, not intimidate. The night of November 4th. The disappearance of Officer Ben Carter. Sarah clutched a paper cup of water, her knuckles white. I told you. I was on my way home from the late shift at the diner. It was almost 3 in the morning. I cut through the alley behind O'Malley's. Bad idea, I know, but it saves 10 minutes. Thorne nodded, his partner, Detective Mia Rodriguez, taking rapid notes on a pad. "I saw the squad car," Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Carter's. It was parked right by the dumpster, engine running. The driver's side door was open." "Did you see Officer Carter?" Mia asked, her voice sharp and to the point. Sarah shook her head violently. "No. That's the thing. I didn't. But I saw something else." The hair on Thorne's arms prickled. This was the hook, the part that had kept him awake since the initial report. Every officer disappearance case was a nightmare, but this one felt wrong. "Tell us, Sarah. Take your time." She took a ragged breath. "I thought maybe he was just, relieving himself. I kept walking. But then I heard it. Not a shout. Not a struggle. Just a sound." "What kind of sound?" Like wet leather scraping stone. "And this gasping noise. Like someone was trying to suck air through a sponge." She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear tracing a clean path down her cheek. "It was loud, Detective. Loud and so close. I froze. I looked into the alley, toward the open car door." "And what did you see, Sarah?" Thorne pressed, leaning forward. "I didn't see Carter. I saw movement. Something low to the ground, shadowy. But it wasn't a person. It was too fast." She paused, trembling. "And then I saw the uniform." Thorne's blood ran cold. "The uniform? What about it?" "It was Carter's. His utility belt, his vest, his boots, they were being dragged. Backwards. They were being pulled into the deepest shadow of the alley, right behind the dumpster." "By whom?" Mia interjected. Sarah opened her eyes, and the terror in them was genuine and profound. "That's the worst part, Detective. They weren't being dragged by anyone. They were moving by themselves. The boots were scraping, the vest was bouncing, and there was nothing holding them. No arms. No hands. Just the clothes, being pulled, fold by fold, until they vanished into the dark corner." Thorne and Mia exchanged a look. The official report stated a missing officer and an abandoned vehicle. But Sarah Jennings' unofficial testimony painted a picture of something impossibly sinister. Officer Ben Carter's clothes, discarded or somehow shed, moving of their own accord into the pitch-black maw of an alley. "And after the uniform disappeared?" Thorne asked, his voice now barely audible. "Silence," she whispered. "Absolute, suffocating silence. I didn't stick around. I ran. I just ran." As Sarah Jennings was escorted out, Thorne stared at the water stain left by her cup. The entire police force was looking for a missing man. But if Sarah was telling the truth, they weren't looking for a body or a suspect. They were looking for whatever had made a police officer unwear his clothes and then drag the empty shell of his uniform into the dark. "What do you think, Alex?" Mia asked, her professionalism strained. Thorne sighed, the weight of the impossible pressing down on him. "I think we have a nightmare on our hands, Mia. And I think the missing man isn't the victim. I think the uniform is. Thorne and Rodriguez stood in the mouth of the alley behind O'Malley's pub, the sickly smell of stale beer and garbage overwhelming the crisp November air. It was barely dawn, and the alley was already cordoned off with bright yellow tape. Floodlights cast harsh, artificial shadows that mocked the deep, organic blackness Sarah Jennings had described. Forensics team found nothing, Alex, Mia said, gesturing to a uniformed officer rolling up a kit. No blood, no signs of struggle, no fiber trace outside the norm. Carter's prints are all over the car, naturally. His sidearm is still locked in the holster inside the vehicle. It's like he stepped out of his clothes and dissolved. Thorne knelt beside the dumpster, the exact spot Sarah claimed the uniform had vanished. He noticed something the forensics team, focused on trace evidence, might have missed. Look at the pavement here, Mia. He pointed to the concrete barely illuminated by the rising sun. There were faint, parallel scratches, almost imperceptible. These aren't tire marks. They're too shallow, too consistent. Mia crouched next to him, running a gloved finger over the lines. Like something was pulled across the ground. But not dragged by a hand. It's too wide. And there's no break in the pattern. Exactly, Thorne murmured. If a person was dragging the uniform, their grip would slip, or their feet would scuff. These marks are perfectly straight, leading right into that corner. He pointed to the space between the dumpster and the brick wall, a narrow, suffocating sliver of shadow. The sliver of shadow Sarah mentioned, Mia confirmed, her voice laced with unease. But Alex, what could pull a vest and boots without leaving a trace of itself? Something that doesn't belong here, Thorne replied, standing up, his eyes tracing the path Carter's uniform supposedly took. He felt a chilling sense of symmetry. The lack of evidence was the evidence. Back at the precinct, Thorne requested all available data on Officer Ben Carter. Carter was a model officer, 3 years on the force, clean record, no known enemies, and a fiancée named Emily. The only anomaly in his life was his assignment location, Sector 5, a rarely used industrial zone on the city's perimeter, near the old abandoned Arkham State Asylum, a local legend of decay and forgotten horrors. Later that afternoon, Thorne sat across from Emily, Carter's fiancée, in her small, sterile apartment. She was heartbroken, but trying to be strong. Ben wasn't just missing, she insisted, clutching a framed photo of them. He was scared. He told me he was seeing things on his patrol route. In Sector 5. What kind of things, Emily? Thorne asked gently. Shadows. Movement at the periphery of his headlights. But the worst was the sound. He started recording his shifts, just audio, for his own peace of mind, he said. She reached for an old, sturdy tape recorder on the coffee table. He recorded this 2 nights before he vanished. He was patrolling the area around the asylum's back perimeter wall. Listen. Emily pressed play. The tape hissed for a moment, then the faint, rhythmic static of a moving squad car filled the room. Carter, whispering, heavy breathing, God, I hate this sector. Nothing but rats and ghosts. Wait, hold on. A slight, sudden increase in the recording volume suggested Carter had pulled over. Carter, engine off. Silence. Just listening. The tape played only the sound of the wind, then, faintly, an irregular, wet scraping noise. Thorne felt a jolt, the same description Sarah Jennings had used, wet leather scraping stone. The scraping grew slightly louder, closer, followed by a sound that made Thorne's chest tighten. It was a sucking noise, a rhythmic, guttural gasping, exactly as Sarah had described. Carter, terrified, voice shaking. Oh no, no, no. What is that? It's not human. It's underneath. I think it's under the car. Then, a sudden, sharp rip, like heavy fabric tearing, followed by a strangled, choked-off scream that cut off abruptly. The only sound remaining on the tape was a soft, sickening slurp, a heavy thud, and then, silence. Profound, absolute silence, broken only by the hiss of the recorder. Thorne reached out and stopped the tape. The silence in the room was deafening. Carter hadn't just gone missing. He had been taken, possibly consumed, by something that operated in silence and moved only in shadow. Something that preyed on the uniform, and left only the empty clothes. The asylum, Thorne stated, pushing back his chair. That's where we go next. It's where this thing hunts. The trail leads to the abandoned Arkham State Asylum, a place where sanity went to die. The Arkham State Asylum was a monument to psychological pain, a sprawling Gothic structure that had been abandoned for 20 years, its decay accelerated by local legends and the city's unwillingness to fund demolition. Thorne and Mia parked their unmarked sedan a quarter-mile from the main gates, opting for a discreet approach through the overgrown perimeter fence in Sector 5. "This place gives me the creeps, Alex," Mia muttered, adjusting the shoulder holster of her weapon. The moon was a sickly crescent, offering minimal light, forcing them to rely on their flashlights. "Keep your light low and your eyes wide," Thorne advised, his hand resting on the grip of his service pistol. Whatever got Carter seems to be drawn to the light and sound of officialdom. "We're out of uniform for a reason." They navigated through the thicket, the broken glass and dead leaves crunching loudly under their tactical boots. They soon reached the crumbling, ivy-choked wall that marked the asylum's boundary, the same wall near where Carter had made his final recording. Thorne aimed his flashlight beam across the base of the wall. He was looking for those strange, parallel scrape marks. "There," Mia whispered, pointing. Etched into the mud and the few patches of exposed concrete were the same twin lines, but here they were deeper, more deliberate. They weren't just the marks of a uniform being dragged, they were consistent, almost mechanical grooves, moving directly toward a small, rusted maintenance door set into the wall. Thorne pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. "Whatever is doing this, it uses this door. Let's see what's on the other side." With a screech of old metal, the lock snapped. They pushed the door inward, revealing a short, dark tunnel that smelled overwhelmingly of mold, ozone, and something sickly sweet, like decaying meat mixed with formaldehyde. "Basement-level access," Thorne noted, switching on a larger, focused beam. "Looks like the tunnel leads to the old laundry facilities." They moved slowly, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The silence inside the asylum was profound, a heavy, breathing void that seemed to press in on their eardrums. They reached a set of stairs leading up into the main basement level. As Thorne reached the top step, his light caught something hanging directly above the doorway. It was a sign, old and peeling, but still legible: uniform disposal and decontamination. "Decontamination?" Mia whispered, her voice tight. What were they decontaminating in a mental hospital? Thorne didn't answer. He was distracted by the floor. Scattered across the grimy tiles were several small, dark, glistening droplets. He knelt, shining his light on them. They were viscous and black, drying slightly at the edges. "Is that blood?" Mia asked, fighting to keep her voice level. Thorne carefully touched a drop with a gloved finger. "No. Not blood. It's too oily. And look at the pattern." The droplets weren't random. They formed a bizarre, erratic trail, not a person walking, but something slithering or rolling. The trail led from the decontamination room, past the main laundry room, and into the massive, echoing space of the asylum's former kitchen. As they entered the cavernous kitchen, Thorne's flashlight beam swept across the rusted industrial ovens and overturned trolleys. Then, the beam stopped, illuminating a long, steel countertop. The old preparation table, lying on the table, neatly folded, was a uniform. It was crisp, clean, and perfectly pressed, complete with a silver badge pinned to the chest and a name tag that read, "Officer R. Evans." "Another missing cop?" Mia's voice was shaky. She walked closer, examining the uniform. "It looks brand new, Alex. No dirt, no rips." Thorne approached cautiously. "But it's not a current Arkham PD uniform. Look at the collar insignia. It's from the old City Patrol pre-2010 consolidation." He reached out slowly and touched the crisp polyester. It felt cold, oddly dry. As his fingers brushed the fabric, he heard it, the faint, irregular sound that was now haunting his every thought: scratch, drag, scratch. It was coming from the shadows behind the table, near the immense, cast-iron dumbwaiter shaft. Thorne pulled his weapon, leveling it at the dark corner. "Mia, get back!" Scratch, gasp, drag. Mia backed up, her own weapon drawn. "Alex, what the hell is that?" A low, unsettling shape began to emerge from the blackness. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a creature. It was a massive, tightly woven bundle of fabric, a patchwork amalgamation of old police uniform material. Trousers, sleeves, vests, and pieces of heavy leather utility belts were somehow stitched together into a low, rolling mass, propelled by an unseen internal mechanism, and resting on top of this grotesque, churning bundle was a pair of old, mud-caked police boots. Officer Ben Carter's boots. The boots slowly lifted, then dropped back onto the mass with a heavy thud, making the rhythmic scratching and gasping sound as the fabric bundle writhed. It was wearing Carter's boots, and its movement was dragging the heavy leather and scraping the floor. It was the uniform. Or rather, the collector of the uniform. The thing paused, its shapeless, fabric form vibrating silently, its only discernible features the empty, mud-caked boots of a dead man. Then, with a sudden, horrifying speed, the mass rolled forward, directly toward the freshly folded uniform of Officer R. Evans. The collector has revealed itself, and it craves the uniform. Can Thorne and Mia survive this impossible encounter, and what is its connection to the asylum's dark past? The fabric mass, a nightmarish textile behemoth, moved with impossible speed, its shapeless body scraping the floor as it rolled toward the steel table. The sight of Officer Carter's boots perched atop the churning uniform pieces was nauseatingly surreal. "Don't shoot!" Thorne barked, pulling Mia back just as she was about to fire. "It's wearing a dead man's gear. We don't know what a bullet will do to that." The creature paused right beside the steel table, its form subtly expanding. Then, in a sickening display of unnatural movement, a section of the uniform mass near the top unfolded, revealing what appeared to be heavy-duty stitching and frayed edges. It looked less like a living creature and more like an animated, inside-out laundry pile. Slowly, deliberately, the mass absorbed the neatly folded uniform of Officer R. Evans. The crisp fabric of the old city patrol uniform seemed to melt into the creature's surface, pulled and incorporated by unseen threads and folds. The name tag and badge were the last things to disappear, sinking into the dark, oily cloth. Once the uniform was gone, the creature settled, its movement slowing. It now looked marginally larger, the color palette of its surface slightly richer with the addition of the new material. "It's collecting them," Mia whispered, horrified. "It's hunting officers and taking their uniforms." But why? Thorne kept his weapon trained on the creature, his mind racing. "It's a camouflage, maybe. Or a sustenance. Look at the way it moves, it's driven." He noticed that the boots of Officer Carter, now firmly attached to the mass, began to slowly shift, turning until they faced Thorne and Mia. The implication was clear, they were the next targets. Suddenly, the floor beneath the creature began to fizz. Black, oily droplets, the same substance Thorne had examined earlier, oozed from the fabric mass, pooling on the floor and emitting a faint, metallic odor. The air grew instantly colder. "It's charging up, Mia. Get back." As they retreated toward the basement stairs, Thorne's eyes caught something else on the counter, a worn, leather-bound ledger. He grabbed it instinctively. The creature let out a sound, not a roar, but a loud, rushing hiss, like a massive steam pipe bursting. It began to roll toward them, faster this time, the rhythmic thud scrape of the boots growing frantic. They slammed the maintenance door shut and bolted through the tunnel. Thorne paused halfway, listening. The scraping sound was muffled by the brick, but still audible. The thing was trying to get through the door. Back in the sedan, driving away from the asylum's crushing darkness, Thorne flipped open the ledger. The pages were brittle, filled with elegant, precise handwriting. It was a logbook from the asylum's decontamination unit, dated 1968. He scanned the cramped cursive until he found an entry that made his blood run cold. October 14, 1968, Dr. Alastair Finch. Experiment 7C, the Symbiotic Cloak. The goal is to create a self-sustaining, mobile defensive shell using chemically treated cellulose and the will of the host. Early failure. The subject's mind was too weak, the uniform rejected the patient. Initial tests show a strong affinity for authority fabrics. Required disposal of 3 complete uniform sets, the mass attempted to consume them upon incineration. Disposed of the residual mass via the sublevel drainage in Sector 5. Hypothesis: the fabric requires a donor body to gain mobility, but rejects the mind, taking only the cloth, the symbiotic cloak. Thorne read aloud, his voice hollow. Mia, this wasn't an ordinary mental hospital. Finch was doing sick experiments here. He tried to fuse a uniform with a patient, a donor body, but the fabric mass only took the will to move and the uniform itself. So, it's not a monster, Mia said, gripping her seatbelt. It's a failed experiment, an animated police uniform that's been living in the Arkham drainage system since 1968, and it needs more and more uniforms to sustain itself. And every time it absorbs a uniform, it gets stronger, and more determined, Thorne finished, looking at the black substance smudging the spine of the ledger. Carter was just its latest acquisition. That thing is driven by some kind of latent programmed will to collect and wear authority, but it can't handle the actual person inside. Thorne then flipped to the very last, hastily scrawled entry, dated late 1968, December 2, 1968, catastrophe. The mass escaped the drainage and targeted the facility warden, Warden Elias Cray. His uniform was taken. The residual matter left behind was dissimilar to prior failures. We are closing the facility immediately and sealing all access points. The thing seems to possess the memory of the uniform it last collected. It knows the patrol routes. It knows the pattern, Thorne repeated, slamming the ledger shut. It knows the patrol routes of the uniforms it wears. It knew Carter's route. And now, it just took a city patrol uniform from the 60s. It's growing smarter, Mia. It's not just collecting uniforms, it's collecting the knowledge that comes with them. He glanced at the clock on the dash. It was almost midnight. We need to get back to the station. If this thing is following old patrol patterns, it's going to target the one place where new uniforms are kept, the locker room at the Arkham PD Annex. The Symbiotic Cloak is a self-sustaining horror with a purpose, to collect authority. Can Thorne and Mia stop it before it raids the entire police precinct? Thorne sped back toward the city, the silence in the car broken only by the frantic sound of the tires on the asphalt. The Arkham PD Annex, where Carter's car had been found and where Sarah Jennings had given her testimony, suddenly felt like a target, not a sanctuary. Call dispatch, Mia, Thorne instructed, gripping the steering wheel. Tell them we have a highly specialized, non-human threat potentially heading for the annex. Emphasize that it's targeting uniforms. Tell them to secure all locker room entrances and have every officer remain out of uniform, civvies only. Mia made the call, her voice strained as she tried to relay the impossible truth to the skeptical dispatcher. I understand this sounds crazy, but this is a code black alert. We're talking about an animated mass of hostile fabric. Yes, I said fabric. Just do it. They reached the annex, a brutalist concrete building, just as a few confused, half-dressed officers were milling around the entrance, questioning the bizarre lockdown order. Thorne and Mia bypassed them, sprinting toward the basement-level locker rooms. The heavy steel door to the men's locker room was already slightly ajar, a thick, black smear of the oily substance fouling the jam. Damn it, we were too late, Thorne growled, drawing his weapon. It's already inside. They moved into the dimly lit, windowless room. The air was thick with the scent of cheap soap, sweat, and the acrid, metallic smell associated with the symbiotic cloak. The sight that greeted them was utter chaos. Dozens of metal lockers had been violently ripped open, their hinges twisted and doors mangled. Uniforms, shirts, trousers, vests, and hats were scattered everywhere. It hasn't taken them all, Mia noted, pointing to the discarded clothes. It looks like it was rejecting some of them. Only the heavy-duty, reinforced gear is missing. Thorne noticed the systematic nature of the attack. The cloak hadn't just shredded the lockers, it had specifically targeted the gear of officers on overnight patrol duty, the most recent, reinforced gear. It was upgrading its armor, scratch, drag, hiss. The sound came from the showers at the back of the locker room. The symbiotic cloak was huge now, easily the size of a small car, a rolling mound of dark blue and black fabric, its surface constantly shifting as the newly acquired material was woven in. Officer Carter's boots were still prominent, acting as crude, terrifying guides. The cloak was currently centered on a workbench, absorbing a high-end, custom-fitted Kevlar vest that belonged to Sergeant Miller, a heavy-duty piece of protective gear. As the vest vanished into the mass, the cloak's movement grew smoother, its hiss louder and more sustained. "It's too big to take down now, Alex. A few pistol rounds won't stop that much padding," Mia said, her voice tight with fear. Thorne remembered the logbook entry. The subject's mind was too weak, the uniform rejected the patient. "It rejects the mind, Mia. It's just fabric and a residual will. It doesn't have a brain to target. We need to find something that can disrupt its will, or the chemicals keeping it animated." Suddenly, the cloak stopped absorbing the vest. The boots swiveled, directing the entire monstrous bulk toward them. It had sensed their presence. A section of the mass near the top unfolded, and this time, it was clear, the cloak was forming a rudimentary shape, not a head or face, but a dense, stitched-together lump of fabric that focused on them. Then, from the center of the fabric lump, came a sound, not the hiss, not the gasp, but a low, synthesized, human voice. It was garbled, echoing, as if being strained through cotton, but undeniably recognizable. A voice, strained, synthesized. "Officer, down. Report, required. Sector 5. Officer. Down." It was a garbled snippet of Ben Carter's radio protocol. The cloak wasn't just wearing his boots, it had absorbed his final, operational thought process. It was hunting them using police procedure. Thorne realized the terror of the situation. The cloak was becoming a sentient, weaponized uniform, driven by the operational ghost of the officers it consumed. "It's broadcasting, Mia. That's its lure. It wants us to approach." The cloak started rolling again, rapidly closing the distance. As it moved, Thorne noticed the oily black substance dripping off. It was melting the plastic floor tiles. "Water, Mia. The decontamination unit. What do they use to clean the fabric?" Mia suddenly remembered a detail from the old ledger. Dr. Finch mentioned a high-concentration sodium hypochlorite solution, basically, industrial-strength bleach. It was meant to break down the chemical coating on the cellulose. "The showers!" Thorne yelled, pointing to the array of shower heads just behind the cloak. "Turn them on, now. Get the water running." Mia sprinted, vaulting over an overturned bench toward the shower controls. Thorne laid down cover fire, aiming high at the ceiling to distract the cloak. The cloak ignored the bullets. It surged forward, its massive bulk crashing into the first row of lockers, sending shrapnel flying. Mia reached the control valves and twisted them violently. With a sputtering roar, the industrial showers erupted, spraying water across the back wall and the shower stalls. The water hit the symbiotic cloak. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The oily black substance dripping off the cloak instantly turned a sickly yellow-green, smoking as it reacted. The cloak halted, letting out an ear-splitting, high-pitched shriek of tearing fabric and rushing steam. The boots of Officer Carter finally detached, falling with a heavy splash onto the slick floor. The cloak began to rapidly unravel, the new Kevlar and uniform pieces violently peeling away from the central core, dissolving into a bubbling, noxious sludge. "Keep it wet, Mia." Thorne yelled, firing another shot into the ceiling to create more noise and confusion. The cloak, reduced in size and visibly weakened, began to retreat, slithering on the melting floor toward a dark, open drain in the center of the room. It was heading back to the only place it knew was safe, the sewer system. Thorne aimed his weapon at the retreating mass. "It's not over, Mia. It's retreating to regenerate." We have to finish it now. The symbiotic cloak has been severely damaged but not destroyed. It now knows the police procedures and has escaped into the city's underbelly. Thorne stood over the central drain in the locker room, the smell of industrial bleach and scorched polyester stinging his nostrils. The floor was a mess of dissolved fabric and melted plastic, but the drain was silent, having swallowed the retreating mass of the symbiotic cloak. Mia approached, clutching a towel to wipe the corrosive residue from her hands. "It's gone, Alex. But we drove it off. The sodium hypochlorite works." "For now," Thorne corrected, looking grimly at the drain cover. "But it's in the sewer system now. It has unlimited dark, damp space to regenerate, and it knows the city's underground routes better than we do. And it has all the old patrol knowledge of the uniforms it absorbed, including Warden Cray's from 1968. It's smarter than a dozen men." Thorne then noticed a small, circular piece of metal clinging to the edge of the drain cover, a highly polished brass button from a uniform. It was perfectly preserved, a tiny souvenir left by the receding terror. "It knows we're hunting it," Thorne said, pocketing the button. "And it knows we used the bleach. It won't make that mistake twice. We need to find its core, its original source of power, before it finds a way to waterproof itself." They returned to the office, where Thorne spread out a massive, dusty blueprint of the Arkham PD Annex and the surrounding Sector 5. The asylum's logbook mentioned the symbiotic cloak was disposed of via the sub-level drainage in Sector 5. Thorne pointed to a spot on the map, a confluence of old sewer lines, directly below the asylum's former uniform disposal room. "That's its point of origin. It's heading home." "It's a long journey through the sewers," Mia observed. "It will need to feed on something to sustain the animation chemicals." Thorne's phone buzzed, a message from the dispatcher. Mia took the call, her face growing pale. "Alex, 3 minutes ago, a security guard at the municipal archives downtown reported a disturbance. He said he saw a rolling mound of dark material moving through the sub-level storage room. They found his jacket, flashlight, and belt dumped near an old maintenance access tunnel leading to the main sewer line. It's feeding on anything with a uniform or authority fabric," Thorne realized. "It's bulking up for the trip back to Sector 5. It's following the oldest, most direct drainage path home. They needed a way to track a shapeless, mobile cloth mass through miles of subterranean tunnels." The button, Thorne suddenly remembered, pulling out the small brass piece. "It's perfectly clean. The cloak absorbs everything except the hardest metals and certain plastics. It's a messy eater." Thorne called the only person he knew who dealt with the strange, forgotten underbelly of the city, Dr. Elias Vance, a retired civil engineer who had spent decades mapping and studying Arkham's complex sewer and drainage system. An hour later, Thorne and Mia met Vance, a stooped, eccentric man who reeked of mildew and pipe tobacco, at an unmarked manhole entrance near the archives. Vance looked at the small brass button under the harsh glow of his headlamp. "Ah, yes. 1960s issue, high zinc content. Extremely resistant to corrosion. If your mobile textile anomaly is traveling, it will leave these." Vance pointed to a massive, yellow vehicle parked nearby. "This is a specialized sewer survey truck. We use tiny, magnetic sensor drones to map blockage. If this thing is shedding small metal fasteners, buttons, zippers, buckle parts, we can track its path." Within minutes, Vance lowered a small, buzzing drone into the manhole. Thorne watched the thermal monitor inside the truck. A few minutes of static, then a clear, moving trail appeared on the screen, a faint signature of metal moving rapidly through the tunnel. "It's moving fast," Vance confirmed. "It's following the old south trunk line, heading directly toward the Sector 5 confluence. It's moving with purpose." "It's heading home," Thorne repeated, feeling a surge of dread. "It's going to the source of its creation. And whatever Dr. Finch left behind there, it's going to make this thing unstoppable." Thorne looked at Mia. "We have to intercept it before it reaches Sector 5. If it gets to its core, We won't be able to destroy it with a few gallons of bleach. Vance pointed at the monitor. There is an old, rarely used access point. The Junction 4 pump station. It's the last point of access before the trunk line runs directly under the asylum. You can intercept it there. As they drove toward the Junction 4 pump station, Thorne realized they were not just chasing a monster, they were chasing a ticking clock. If the symbiotic cloak reached its subterranean lair, it would gain the power to not just wear the uniform, but perhaps wear the city itself. The final confrontation is set for the abandoned Junction 4 pump station. The Junction 4 pump station was a rusted, cavernous space hidden beneath a freeway underpass, a monument to the city's forgotten infrastructure. Inside, the air was thick with humidity and the metallic tang of deep water. 3 enormous, silent pump mechanisms dominated the floor, their massive gears frozen in time. Thorne and Mia descended the slippery concrete stairs, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. They had brought the necessary gear, 2 high-powered sprayers filled with a lethal, industrial-grade sodium hypochlorite solution, and 2 rolls of high-tensile steel mesh fencing. Vance said the trunk line runs right under this main floor, Thorne whispered, checking the sprayer pressure. The cloak will have to pass through this area to get to Sector 5. We ambush it here. Mia pointed to a large, open channel of sluggish, black water that ran beneath a grated walkway. That's the trunk line. The cloak is going to come up through here. On Thorne's radio, the voice of Dr. Vance crackled faintly. Detectives, the drone is showing your quarry slowing down. It's reached the junction. It's attempting to breach the main tunnel section leading up to the pump floor. Get ready. Thorne nodded grimly. Set up the trap. We cover the main channel with the mesh. If we can trap it long enough, we can drench it. They swiftly unrolled the heavy steel mesh, laying it taut across the central channel where the sewer line emerged. They braced the edges with heavy pipe wrenches scavenged from the pump station. Suddenly, a loud, grinding scrape echoed from the tunnel below, a sound far louder and more powerful than the faint drag Sarah Jennings had heard in the alley. The steel mesh over the channel began to bulge and vibrate violently. It's here. Hit the lights. Thorne yelled, flicking off his flashlight. The station plunged into absolute darkness, save for the weak ambient light filtering from the grates far above. Thorne and Mia took cover behind the massive, silent pump casings, their fingers ready on the sprayers. The mesh ripped open with a sound like a cannon shot. The symbiotic cloak burst onto the pump station floor, larger and darker than before, having absorbed the security guard's uniform. It was now roughly the size of a minivan, a churning, mountainous mass of dark fabric, still wearing Officer Carter's boots, but also now adorned with the heavier, reinforced parts of the archive guard's coat. It paused, its shapeless, stitched head turning slowly, scanning the blackness. It let out another burst of the garbled radio protocol, a voice, louder, clearer, echoing, suspicious, activity, perimeter, initiate, search, pattern, target, located. The cloak was adapting faster than they anticipated. It was using the spatial awareness from the uniforms it had consumed. Thorne waited until the massive bulk passed his hiding spot. Now, Mia. They both leaped out and simultaneously blasted the cloak with the concentrated streams of sodium hypochlorite. The cloak was instantly engulfed in a noxious, smoking haze. The air filled with that searing, high-pitched shriek of dissolving fabric and chemicals. The fabric mass bucked violently, shedding chunks of smoldering, dissolving cloth, but this time, the cloak reacted differently. Instead of retreating, it rolled away from the spray, maneuvering its vast bulk to use a massive pump casing as a shield. The newest layers of absorbed fabric were peeling away, but the inner, older core was far more resilient. It's resisting. Mia shouted over the shriek. It's too dense. The chemical isn't penetrating deep enough. The cloak, reduced but still immense, charged the pump casing behind which Mia was sheltering. The force of the impact was tremendous, a sickening crunch of tearing metal. Mia dodged, but the cloak's momentum sent a large, metal pulley wheel flying. Thorne blasted the creature again, targeting a spot where the original black, oily substance was visible beneath the smoldering surface. The cloak finally stopped, shaking violently. From the center of the mass, a thick, dark, rope-like strand of fabric suddenly shot out, whipping through the air toward Thorne. Thorne narrowly avoided the projectile. It struck the concrete wall behind him with a wet smack, leaving a sticky, residue-covered tear mark, it's weaponizing the fabric. Mia warned, spraying the creature's base to keep it immobile. The creature's voice returned, now cold and utterly chilling, synthesizing multiple voices into a single, commanding tone of voice, cold, authoritative, unauthorized, engagement. Stand down. Officers. Resistance will be met with force. The cloak was using its consumed knowledge of police procedure not just to hunt, but to command. It was trying to enforce authority over them. Thorne emptied his sprayer, coating the creature in the last of the solution. The cloak shrank slightly more, but the attack had failed to neutralize its core. The creature finally retreated, turning and rolling back toward the gaping hole in the sewer line. Its movement was slower, wounded, but purposeful. It was not defeated, it was escaping to Sector 5. Thorne threw the empty sprayer aside. It's running home. We follow it now. Alex, we're out of chemical solution. We can't go in there empty-handed. Mia protested, pointing toward the dark, stinking sewer tunnel. Thorne pulled out the small brass button he'd pocketed earlier. We can't let it get to its source. If it regenerates in Sector 5, it will have enough power to leave the asylum and take the whole city. We're going in, Mia. We finished this where it started. The symbiotic cloak is wounded but heading for the asylum's sub-level drainage system to regenerate. Thorne and Mia must pursue it into the darkness, but what awaits them at the source of the terrible experiment? Thorne and Mia stood at the mouth of the dark sewer tunnel, the rank, stale air a sickening contrast to the bleach residue still clinging to their clothes. They were out of chemical deterrent, relying only on their sidearms and the desperate necessity of stopping the cloak. We need more than bullets, Alex, Mia stated, checking her magazine. That thing is fabric. We need fire, or something that attacks the synthetic core. Vance is sending a specialized hazmat team with industrial-grade chemical gel, but they're still an hour out, Thorne replied, attaching a small tactical light to his weapon. We don't have an hour. We follow the drainage path toward Sector 5. The ledger said the cloak was disposed of via sub-level drainage. That means there must be a point of dumping, a pit, a reservoir, where the residual chemicals from Finch's experiment were concentrated. They moved into the tunnel, navigating the treacherous footing of the sewer line. The air grew colder, and soon, the faint, erratic trail of oily black residue confirmed they were following the wounded cloak. The trail led them deeper, through branching side tunnels, until they reached a wide, circular junction chamber. The chamber was unnaturally quiet, the usual hum of flowing water replaced by a chilling silence. In the center of the floor was a massive, grated opening, an overflow drain far larger than any standard sewer inlet. From this drain, the scent of ozone, formaldehyde, and something ancient and rotten was almost unbearable. This is it, Thorne whispered, shining his light down the pit. The original dumping ground. He saw a series of crumbling metal steps leading down into the darkness. Just below the grate, caught on a rusted edge, was a piece of dark blue fabric, a shred from the severely damaged symbiotic cloak. They descended cautiously. The pit opened into a colossal, dome-shaped underground chamber. The walls were lined with old, corroded plumbing and chemical pipes. In the center of the chamber lay a stagnant, murky pool of black water, the chemical sump where Dr. Finch had disposed of his failed experiments, and in the center of the sump, surrounded by bubbling, iridescent chemicals, lay the core. It was a large, dense sphere, roughly the size of a tire, composed of the same oily, black cellulose material as the cloak, but utterly saturated with the dark chemical fluid. From the core, thin, dark strands of fabric pulsed outward into the murky water, like veins, and resting right beside the core, like a dark sentinel, was the symbiotic cloak itself. It had shrunk drastically from the chemical exposure, reduced to the original size it was when Sarah Jennings had witnessed it, a low, rolling mass of dark uniform fabric, still with Officer Carter's boots attached. It was submerged halfway in the chemical sump, visibly drinking the fluid, drawing energy and material back into its core. The cloak had nearly finished regenerating. As Thorne's light hit the creature, the core in the center of the sump pulsed rapidly, and the cloak instantly turned toward them, a voice, stronger, clearer, metallic. Intruders detected. Arkham PD violation of sealed premises. Detention mandatory. The voice was terrifyingly clear now, an amalgamation of authority, the cold command of Warden Cray mixed with the rigid protocol of Officer Carter. The cloak detached from the core and rolled toward them with renewed speed, launching two sharp, barbed strands of fabric at their heads. Thorne and Mia dodged, the strands embedding themselves with a thwack into the concrete wall behind them. The core, Mia. We have to hit the core. Thorne yelled. They fired. The bullets tore through the cloak's fabric mass, causing it to slow and recoil, but the damage was momentary. The cloak didn't bleed, it merely shed ripped fabric, which instantly began to crawl back toward the core, seeking reabsorption. The cloak began to form a dense, protective shield of layered fabric around itself. It was learning to defend its surface from projectile attack. Suddenly, Mia noticed a heavy, corroded access panel on the wall directly above the sump. The pipes, Alex. Look, she shouted, pointing. Finch must have used those pipes to flush the chemical solution down. If we can break the main feed valve, we can flood the sump with whatever is left in the system. Thorne saw it, a thick, rusted main valve, labeled, chemical feed line, high concentration. The valve is too rusted to turn. We have to shoot it. Thorne laid down suppressing fire, drawing the cloak's attention. The creature surged toward him, its form low and ready to launch more fabric whips. Mia hit the valve. Now. Mia aimed carefully, focusing on the weakest point of the antique valve casing. 1 shot. 2 shots. The thick brass casing refused to break. The cloak reached Thorne, its mass enveloping his legs. He felt a sharp, intense pull as the fabric tried to grip his trousers, trying to pull him out of his uniform. The force was immense. Mia fired a final, desperate shot. The casing shattered. With a massive whoosh, the pipe burst open. A torrent of foul-smelling, thick, yellow-green liquid, the residual sodium hypochlorite solution, decades old and highly concentrated, erupted from the pipe, cascading down directly into the chemical sump. The chemical sump violently reacted. The black, stagnant water began to churn and boil. The liquid hit the core. A deafening scream of pure synthetic pain erupted from the chamber, not a human scream, but the sound of chemicals violently consuming chemicals. The core began to rapidly bubble and disintegrate. The symbiotic cloak, still clinging to Thorne's legs, instantly went limp. Its power source was gone. The fabric mass collapsed onto the ground with a soft, final thud, reduced to nothing more than a limp, wet, discarded pile of police uniforms and a pair of mud-caked boots. Thorne kicked the dead fabric off, gasping for air. The terrifying silence returned. They had done it. They had destroyed the core. Mia slowly lowered her weapon, relief flooding her face. It's over. Thorne, however, looked not at the pile of dead fabric, but at the remnants of the core, still dissolving in the sump. No, Mia, he whispered, picking up a shard of the crystallized, shattered core material. Finch experimented with the will of the host. If the core held the will, what happens when it shatters and gets released? The symbiotic cloak is destroyed, but its animating force, the collective, twisted will of its consumed officers, is now free. The horror isn't over, it's just changed form. The dome-shaped chamber was silent, save for the dripping of water and the hiss of the last remnants of the chemical solution reacting in the sump. Thorne and Mia stood exhausted, surrounded by the wreckage of their battle. The symbiotic cloak was a lifeless, sodden pile of cloth, and the core was reduced to shards of rapidly dissolving black crystal. It's over, Alex. It's finally over, Mia said, leaning against the cold, damp wall, trying to catch her breath. Thorne was less convinced. He held up the crystal shard he'd picked up. It felt warm, almost humming faintly. He tossed it into the boiling sump, where it dissolved instantly. Finch's note said the core held the will of the host, Thorne explained, his eyes sweeping the chamber. The uniforms were just the shell. We destroyed the container, Mia, but we didn't destroy what was inside. We just released it. As if on cue, a sudden, cold gust of wind, an impossibility in the sealed, subterranean chamber, whipped through the room, making the scattered rags of the cloak flutter eerily. Thorne pulled out his police radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Thorne. Code Black is neutralized. Send hazmat to Sector 5, Junction 4, Access Tunnel, and initiate a citywide psychological evaluation on all Arkham PD personnel, effective immediately." The trip back through the sewer tunnels was silent and tense. They were no longer afraid of a visible monster, but of an invisible contagion. The contagion spreads back at the annex. The hazmat team was busy dealing with the locker room mess, and the media was being fed a carefully crafted story about a chemical leak. Thorne and Mia, however, were focused on the terrifying new threat. Thorne reviewed the reports coming in from the precinct. The psychological evaluation order was already yielding disturbing results. Report 1, Officer Dave Jenkins, a quiet patrolman, suddenly filed a detailed, multi-page grievance against the entire force for improper uniform storage. He was obsessive, angry, and demanding absolute, rigid adherence to uniform code, which was completely out of character. Report 2, Detective Lieutenant Victor Hayes, known for his laid-back demeanor, was found polishing his badge with surgical precision, muttering the garbled radio protocols they had heard from the cloak. Officer, down. Report, required. Sector 5. He had been doing this for an hour, unresponsive to questions. Report 3, several officers simultaneously began reporting phantom scraping and gasping sounds coming from their squad cars, even when the engines were off. "It's infecting them, Alex," Mia said, pushing a handful of printouts across Thorne's desk. The collective will of the officers the cloak consumed, Cray, Carter, Evans, the archives guard. It was released when the core shattered, and it's looking for new hosts. It's infecting the minds of the men who wear the uniform. "It's a psychic parasite, Mia," Thorne confirmed, running a hand over his face. "It targets the will to serve, but twists it into a dark, obsessive drive for protocol and authority. It's turning them into perfect, soulless automatons of duty." Thorne remembered the cloak's final, synthesized voice: "Resistance will be met with force." The cloak was trying to enforce order. Now the dispersed will is doing the same thing, but using the minds of our officers as its new medium, Thorne said. "It's turning the whole Arkham PD into the new symbiotic cloak." The first incident later that night, the inevitable happened. Officer Dave Jenkins, the one obsessed with improper uniform storage, snapped. He barricaded himself in the evidence room, surrounded by confiscated police uniforms waiting for destruction. When the on-duty shift commander, Captain Nolan, approached, trying to talk him down, Jenkins opened the door just enough to slide out a note. The note was written in perfectly neat, spidery script, echoing the style of Dr. Finch's ledger. It read, "The body rejected the cloak. Now the cloak reclaims the body. Uniform disposal is mandatory." A minute later, 2 gunshots rang out, followed by a sickening, unmistakable sound. Not a struggle, not a scream, but a heavy, wet slurp. Thorne and Mia, arriving on the scene moments later, found the evidence room door open. Officer Jenkins was gone. All that remained was his clean, perfectly folded uniform on the floor, the boots scraped and scuffed, just like Carter's, and in the center of the uniform lay a small, dark stain that began to slowly seep into the concrete. The pattern was repeating itself. The dispersed will had fully possessed Officer Jenkins, forced him to shed his uniform, and then consumed him. But this time, it left no rolling mass of fabric. The will had found a more efficient method of consumption and dispersal. "He's gone, Mia," Thorne stated, looking at the ominous stain. "And the will that took him is now stronger, more adaptable, and still wearing the uniform. The symbiotic will is possessing officers and making them disappear, leaving only their folded uniforms behind." The disappearance of Officer Jenkins, leaving only his folded uniform and the lingering black stain, sent a wave of icy panic through the Arkham PD. The official cover story was an immediate, emergency transfer, but Thorne and Mia knew the terrifying truth: the dispersed symbiotic will was hunting them from within their own ranks. The annex was locked down, but the infection was insidious. The atmosphere was no longer one of camaraderie, but of cold, rigid adherence to rules. Officers moved with unnatural precision, their faces blank, their voices clipped and devoid of emotion. Thorne and Mia quickly realized the new pattern: the will was targeting officers with existing, deeply ingrained habits of duty and protocol, amplifying those traits until the host's personality was overwhelmed and consumed. The next victim was Detective Lieutenant Hayes, the man obsessed with polishing his badge. Thorne found Hayes in the armory, standing perfectly still, his uniform impeccably neat. He wasn't polishing his badge anymore. He was staring at a display case filled with vintage, highly decorated police uniforms. "Lieutenant Hayes, what are you doing?" Thorne asked, approaching cautiously, Mia covering his back. Hayes didn't flinch. His voice was flat, devoid of the man's usual deep timbre. "Cataloging. The collection is incomplete. Must adhere to the pattern." "What pattern, Lieutenant?" Hayes slowly turned, his eyes glazed over with a frightening, distant focus. "The perfect pattern. Unburdened by personality. Unburdened by the body. Only the uniform remains." Suddenly, Hayes moved with impossible speed, a blur of practiced efficiency. He didn't attack them, he sprinted past them, out of the armory, and down the main hall. Thorne and Mia pursued him, but Hayes was unnaturally fast. He reached the evidence locker, which was conveniently unlocked due to the earlier chaos, and disappeared inside. "He's going for the disposal pit," Thorne shouted, realizing Hayes was heading for the trash compactor chute that led to the city's main incinerator, the ultimate form of uniform disposal. They reached the chute just in time to hear a hollow thud from the bottom. Hayes had jumped. When they looked down, the scene was a grotesque echo of the previous night. Hayes was gone. On the metal floor of the compactor, neatly folded, lay his immaculate uniform. But this time, it was different. Resting on top of the folded shirt was Hayes' polished badge. It was now glowing with a faint, oily black sheen, the same color as the dissolved core. "It's not just consuming them, Mia," Thorne said, his voice choked with horror. "It's using a part of the uniform as a transfer medium. The badge, the insignia, the symbol of authority, it's storing the will inside the metal itself." The glowing badge was evidence of the ultimate contamination. The symbiotic will was not just possessing minds, it was turning the very symbols of the police force into its own infectious agents. The final plan. Thorne and Mia retreated to Thorne's office, locking the door. The entire annex felt like a hostile entity. They couldn't trust anyone wearing a uniform. "The will is driven by the twisted desire for perfect, clean protocol and uniform collection," Mia summarized, staring at the glowing badge on Thorne's desk. They had placed it under an inverted steel container. "It wants the clean slate of the folded uniform. We need to create a uniform that it cannot accept, a uniform so contaminated and repulsive to its core belief that it forces the will out." Thorne remembered the logbook entry on Finch's failed experiment. The subject's mind was too weak, the uniform rejected the patient. "We need a counterwill, Mia," Thorne realized. Finch tried to fuse a weak mind with the uniform. "We need a mind that is strong, resistant, and utterly disorderly, the opposite of protocol. And we need to contaminate the uniform with something the will despises." Thorne looked around his office. He had one advantage: he wasn't wearing his uniform. He was in civvies, jeans and a t-shirt. Ever since the sewer dive, the will is fixated on the uniform. "If we wear one, we become a target," Thorne said. "But if I wear one, and contaminate it with the most anti-protocol substance imaginable, and if I project a total absence of order," he looked at the only other person he could trust. "I'm going to be the bait, Mia. I'll wear a uniform, contaminate it, and use my own mind, my own messy, non-compliant self, as a counterwill to draw the will out of this station." Mia looked horrified. "Alex, if you fail, you become the strongest," most terrifying vessel the will has ever consumed. I know, Thorne said, pulling out a spare, clean uniform from the back of his locker. But we have to try. Find every bottle of industrial solvent, oil, and paint stripper you can. And get me the filthiest thing in this station that isn't connected to a crime scene. Their final, desperate plan was to create a uniform so inherently wrong, so contrary to the symbiotic will's obsessive need for perfection, that the will would either reject the vessel entirely or be forced to manifest and expose itself for a final confrontation. Thorne is preparing to face the symbiotic will by turning himself into the ultimate lure. Can he corrupt the perfect uniform enough to survive the psychic attack, or will he become the will's final, perfect host? Thorne's office was rapidly transformed into a makeshift contamination chamber. Mia worked with grim efficiency, assembling the tools for their desperate gamble. The spare police uniform was soaked in every non-compliant substance Mia could find: stale coffee, rancid fryer oil from the annex cafeteria, bright orange paint, used for road markings, and copious amounts of solvent. The once crisp uniform was now a repulsive, dripping, multicolored mess, the antithesis of the symbiotic will's rigid, clean aesthetic. This should be offensive enough to repel an army, let alone a ghost made of protocol, Mia muttered, wrinkling her nose as she handed the foul-smelling gear to Thorne. Thorne pulled on the saturated uniform. The heavy, cold fabric clung to him, the fumes instantly making his eyes water. He felt not just physically uncomfortable, but psychologically exposed. Okay. The lure is set, Thorne said, his voice husky. He then took a moment, consciously letting his mind drift to every moment of chaos, improvisation, and non-compliance he had committed during his career, the messy, human elements the will abhorred. I'm projecting disorder, Mia. I'm thinking about every rule I've bent, every procedure I've ignored. I'm a broken, filthy vessel. He then picked up the black, glowing badge of Lieutenant Hayes, now pulsing slightly brighter with the will's contained energy. He pinned it directly over his heart. On the ruined, oil-soaked uniform, the will is here, concentrated in the metal. It's waiting for a clean host. It's going to sense this perfectly corrupted target and it will have a choice: consume the strongest authority symbol, or flee the overwhelming contamination. Be careful, Alex. If it breaches your defenses, it's not just your life, it's your mind, Mia warned, her weapon drawn, covering the door. Thorne opened the office door and stepped out into the main bullpen. The atmosphere instantly changed. The infected officers, who had been moving with their cold, automatic precision, suddenly faltered. Their heads turned in unison, drawn by the catastrophic visual dissonance of the perfectly clean, ordered symbol, the badge, pinned to the utterly anarchic uniform. The noise started immediately, a low, collective hiss that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the precinct. 3 infected officers, Jenkins' immediate supervisor, a desk sergeant, and a traffic officer, began to move toward Thorne. They weren't running, they were marching with synchronized, unnatural precision, their faces blank masks of protocol. A voice, collective, synthesized whisper: contamination, detected. Uniform, violation. Immediate, termination, required. The will was using the collective minds of the infected to launch a synchronized attack. Thorne stood his ground. He felt a sudden, sharp spike of mental intrusion, a searing demand for order and cleanliness, a furious psychic command to remove the filth, clean it. Fold it. Dispose of the failure. The thought screamed inside his head. Thorne grit his teeth and pushed back, visualizing every messy file, every overdue report, every cup of cold, forgotten coffee. I am disorder. I am chaos. You can't clean this. You can't wear this. The advancing officers stumbled, their synchronized march breaking. The psychic backlash from Thorne's repulsive mental image was affecting their concentration. Suddenly, the black, oily sheen on the badge pinned to Thorne's chest began to writhe. The symbiotic will was manifesting, desperately trying to abandon its containment. With a high-pitched, metallic shriek of furious rejection, the black substance exploded off the badge. It didn't take a physical form, but instantly dispersed into a shimmering, black mist that filled the air of the bullpen. The mist, the pure, psychic will, surged directly toward Thorne's face, attempting to enter his mind and take control of the strong, but contaminated, host body. Thorne felt the agonizing pressure as the will slammed into his consciousness, a million conflicting protocols, procedures, and rules trying to overwrite his identity. You are mine. The will roared inside his skull. Perfect order will be achieved, Thorne struggled, falling to one knee. He had one last resort. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the single item Mia had scavenged, a large, sticky, moldy piece of discarded Arkham PD Annex birthday cake, the filthiest, most non-compliant food item imaginable. With a final act of desperation and defiance, Thorne smeared the moldy cake across the contaminated badge pinned to his chest, right over the residual black sheen. The psychic will recoiled with an agonizing shatter. The cake, the ultimate symbol of messy, unscheduled, and unprofessional celebration, was the psychic weapon of final rejection. The black mist violently compressed, swirling into a small, frantic sphere. The will, unable to possess the contaminated vessel, and repulsed by the ultimate symbol of human disorder, had nowhere else to go. The infected officers immediately collapsed, their eyes clearing as the will fled their minds. The black sphere of pure symbiotic will shot across the bullpen, seeking a final, clean escape route. It headed not for a window, but for the open, dark mouth of the trash compactor chute, the symbol of disposal. Mia didn't hesitate. She fired a single, carefully aimed shot from her pistol, hitting the light fixture above the compactor chute. The light exploded, showering the tiny black sphere with fragments of glass. The will, momentarily confused and damaged by the physical impact, paused just above the chute. Thorne, gasping for air, pointed the heavy fire extinguisher he had kept nearby. Final decontamination. He doused the tiny sphere of black wool with a torrent of white, dry chemical powder, a sterile, suffocating barrier that was neither cloth, nor liquid, nor mind. The powder encased the sphere, blinding and neutralizing its psychic energy. The sphere dropped with a silent thud down the trash compactor chute, instantly encased in the final, unbreachable barrier. Solid, unyielding steel. The symbiotic will is neutralized, sealed away, and the terrifying plague of protocol is lifted. But the incident has left deep scars on the Arkham PD. What were the lasting consequences, and what secret was kept to protect the city? The official report filed by Detective Alex Thorne and Detective Mia Rodriguez regarding the incidents at the Arkham PD Annex was a masterpiece of careful omission and controlled fiction. The official narrative stated, Officer Ben Carter and Lieutenant Victor Hayes were transferred to a highly classified federal protective unit. Officer Dave Jenkins was cited for an unsanctioned chemical incident and immediately discharged. The symbiotic cloak, the core, and the black mist were never mentioned. Instead, the incident was closed as a catastrophic chemical contamination event stemming from the asylum sublevel drainage, which caused temporary mass hysteria among the officers. The truth, however, lingered like the faint, metallic scent of ozone in the station's ventilation system. The aftermath. The annex was quietly, and thoroughly, decontaminated. The massive steel trash compactor, which now held a small, dry, white sphere of suffocated psychic will, was permanently sealed and removed to an undisclosed military facility. The affected officers, including the ones who had marched on Thorne, were given mandatory administrative leave and extensive psychological evaluations. Most were cleared to return, their memories of the event hazy, fragmented by the chemical exposure and the psychic intrusion. They were different, though, less focused on petty rules, more prone to sudden, nervous breakdowns when faced with an overflowing desk or a misplaced folder. Thorne himself was awarded a commendation for quick thinking during a hazardous material emergency. He never wore his uniform again, opting for civilian clothes and his detective's badge, a personal, unspoken protocol against becoming a target. Mia Rodriguez, his only confidant, shared his aversion. They had survived the perfect symbol of authority and learned that true safety lay in human imperfection. The final warning. A week later, Thorne received a large, unmarked box delivered to his apartment. Inside was a complete set of the asylum's archival materials, delivered anonymously, presumably by Dr. Elias Vance, the sewer engineer who had quietly disappeared after submitting his final tracking report. Among the brittle papers, Thorne found a final, sealed letter from Dr. Alastair Finch, dated 2 weeks before the Warden Cray incident in 1968. Final thesis. Finch. The symbiotic cloak fails because the uniform itself is inherently a symbol of restriction and order. It attracts the weakest minds seeking external structure and rejects any personality that threatens its perfect protocol. The will, once separated from the textile, is a pure force of rigid duty. It will only ever seek to replicate the conditions of its creation, the uniform and the authoritative mindset that I have realized the true horror. Destroying the vessel does not destroy the will. It merely makes it invisible and adaptable. The will is now a concept, a psychic contagion that turns men into pure, efficient, uniform-shedding functionaries. The only true defense is to embrace the disorder of human spirit, for the will cannot abide chaos. Thorne closed the file, his expression grim. He looked